Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose. Happy New Year. If you did stay up and celebrate, I hope you had fun. Let me know if you have any New Year's resolutions. About the only thing I have is trying to be a little bit more consistent on here, but we're in this together if you do have anything. First up, in 2025 is a book I actually started towards the end of last year and finished up at the start of this one. We might be well after Halloween at this point, but this time of year is still perfect for the spooky side of things. It feels like it's dark 90% of the time, and with the weather the way it is at the minute, we hardly get any actual bright days. And also, it's been so foggy lately, so sitting down with a good collection of horror is honestly the perfect way to spend your time, in my opinion. So today we're going to be looking at a collection of Chinese horror compiled and translated by Xueting Ni. Now, I make my apologies for pronunciations. I have looked things up that are difficult, or actually I've looked at things up that I thought I knew how to pronounce as well, because a lot of it isn't how I thought it would be, but I don't know if I'm getting it right, and I know tone and intonation is really important, but I've never spoken the language before, so I'm doing my best, but I make apologies, and I will, if I remember, put any names on the screen so you can see what I'm trying to say. Like I said, I've looked up pronunciations, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get it right. I'm trying to copy something that I've never heard before. But spoilers up ahead. I'm not deep diving everything. There's only one story I'm going really deep into, and there's another that I've gone semi deep into. But I just want to, warn you now, there are spoilers coming up. And we open the book with some content warnings with a little preamble beforehand saying, the idea of content warnings is relatively new and especially in a horror book could be considered a spoiler. I wanted to make this collection as accessible as possible, so have decided to include what are probably the most important ones on a story by story basis. If you do not need the warnings or just want to experience the stories cold, stop reading here. And honestly, I'm all for this. It's laid out with the option of skipping ahead, and the page before this one is the contents page, so you can easily find where you need to go and skip, or you can find what you're looking for if any of the content warnings are too much. I also really enjoyed Xueting's introduction. Learning of the context and history of the horror genre within Chinese literature was really fascinating, and I think it does help set the tone for what's to come. While I'm not going over every story, I do think it's right to start at, start. And that leads us to The Girl in the Rain by Hong Niangzi. A starless sky. From behind an obfuscation of clouds, the silver moon scattered a few dismal rays into the silent night. From a distance, tall, grim, and cadaverous white, the hideous exterior of the woman's hall of residence resembled a coffin. An incredibly beautiful opener to the story, setting us up with a dark and gothic energy, and as we come to later understand, the ghostly folk tales that this story is set up around, that only continues. And honestly, this whole prelude sets us up in such a brilliant way. We're taken from large scale to small little detail and then back out again for the setup until close to the end of it, and it's such a brilliant technique, giving us just a little bit more of the story itself each time we're brought into the small detail, finally ending with a girl having thrown herself off the balcony to her death, which is described in macabre detail. We see her on the ground, and there is detail with that which is just grim. It's an incredibly impactful way to open not only the story itself but the whole book, and that can honestly be said of the whole tale. We're set up just after the prelude that urban legends are a thing on campus, like a big thing, but as we go through, it becomes less and less clear if they were set up for what's to come, here's the myths that are on campus and hears that seemingly coming true, or is that a ruse to make you think that's the case and take your mind away from what's actually happening? The way a magician will take your focus onto one hand while doing the trick with the other, it uses unreliable narration in such a unique way, because that's usually reserved for first person narratives much more, whereas this is being told in the third person. And I think that's really interesting. Like I say, third person unreliable narrators are a little more unusual, but it is handled really well here. While the epilogue, it wasn't my favourite, the story works really well overall. I couldn't be too annoyed at it. It didn't ruin the story at the last moment. It was just a little confusing. But to be fair, it's dealing with twists and they often do that. And this story makes you question yourself over what's real anyway, so it's not too surprising. And like I say, great way to open the book. I'll also say here that I really love the notes from Xueting at the end of each story, giving a little extra cultural context and talking a little on the authors as well. Next up is one of my favourites from the collection, and I think I'll go into a little bit more detail on it because I do love it so much. And this next story is The Waking Dream by Fanjo. We start out in a meeting with our protagonist, Shen Yue, as she is talking with two other architects and their chief. Shen Yue pretends to lower her head casually, focusing her gaze on the grain on the table surface and avoiding what is pacing behind the chief, the giant spawn monster with countless eyes. Brilliant way to drop us in, and that's followed by a wonderfully vile description of that beast, nobody seeming to notice it except Shen. I couldn't work out at first if that was the case or if it was the sort of thing that was so quote unquote normal that everyone else just ignored it and maybe she was new to this, but no, it is just her that sees it. And as she's walking to her office, everyone has some form of creature with them. And again, only her spotting their presence. It is a deeply unsettling way to start the story. We have zero context at this point, and it's so what the fuck? But I was hooked from the off. Now, Shen is not technically in the real world in this moment. Her body is, but her mind is basically working for her in a virtual space while her body sleeps. We come to learn that the stuff she sees surrounding people are their nightmares. There is one singular person that has nothing with them, and that's her co-worker Zhao Zizhan. He instead has a pink glow emanating from under his shirt, and when asked what her worst nightmare is, we hear of her recurring night terror. So in this dream, she's about 13, running to school for a big test, only to find the school completely empty. Waiting by her desk, she hears a sound, and all of a sudden the door swings open, and in front of her is a huge monster with a mirror where its head should be. She opens her eyes, sure the nightmare is finished, and her mother comes in to comfort her, having heard some commotion coming from her room. She's offered some fruit by her mother and takes some tangerine from her. Once she's eaten that, she looks up, but instead of seeing her mother, she sees the headless mirror monster from before, realising that she never actually left the dream and has to throw herself from the balcony to get back to reality. Now, in this story, waking from one's dream is not a surefire way to safety, and once she ends her working day, Shen is reminded of this. Outside of dreams and the virtual working space, in what is supposed to be the normal world, Shen enters her living room only to find the creature from her nightmares. It's an incredibly haunting scene. This should be the one place where she is safe, but even there she is plagued by this being. And what's so unsettling about this thing is the quietness of it. 9 times out of 10 it's not trying to chase her or harm her. Obviously it's not got a weapon or anything most of the time. I think in that last dream it does try and get her, but it's mostly just there, looking back at her, either with a distorted version of her face, or later it's her father's face. Believing that what she saw in her apartment was a cause of too much time spent in the virtual space, she returns to work and makes a transfer request to regular working. And while everything so far has been an excellent allegory for the ways that work often makes mental health worse due to the amount of stress it causes, this scene really compounds that. Her manager is across from her, basically like, it's just mental health systems linked to stress. And then he's also like, well, I'm fine coping with this stuff you're presenting me with, so it's fine. You're also fine. It was so stressful to read because it's just like, it's a bit too real. And she is, of course, unable to get the transfer she wants, because this is a problem everybody faces, even though that suggests that it's a huge problem, not just a one-person problem. Her co-worker explains to her that her mental state is a complete sign of exhaustion. Like, she kind of plays it off when she's talking to him about it, but he's like, actually, that's really serious. Sort of like when you make a dark joke and you realise just how dark it is when other people don't laugh. One of those situations. Like, she needs time off, if nothing else. Like, she just needs to take a break. So she goes, okay, fine, and invites him to take a short holiday with her, going mountain climbing or something, just the two of them. And he accepts the offer, but has worries that she just won't take enough time away. So he warns her of the dangers without saying as much aloud. He tells her of a story of an engineer who couldn't wake properly, who experienced much of the same symptoms that she is currently going through. And in the time leading up to her vacation, it seems like it's only a couple of days, her delusions get worse and much more vivid. She's like wading through water, and it's even more horrifying because literally nobody else can see this. It's just her. And it is such a good representation of delusional mental health symptoms, because it is a case that you are the only one that can see it, and you can try to explain that to other people, but it will never make full sense unless they go through something very similar. And how it's just getting worse and worse, and even though there is something she can do about it, it's hard, because as she says sometimes, at some point rather, it's this or poverty, and it's just like, oh, Jesus. Like, the mirror monster is with her constantly now. And again, it's not actively trying to hurt her, but seemingly taunting her or serving as some awful reminder of things that have happened in her past. And it all gets too much for her, and she storms into the chief's office. But the chief sees what she sees. He never has before, but he does in this moment. And she knows that that means he's in danger, because if somebody, we sort of learnt about this earlier, that if people are seeing this sort of thing and they don't usually, then it means that something is happening in the real world. It's like a warning. Sort of like if you see a toilet in your dream, it means you need to get up and take a piss. It's kind of like that, but much more serious. And she does everything she can to wake him up, and eventually she resorts to pushing him off the balcony, which obviously is a good callback to her own nightmare earlier in the story. He wakes in his room, and he's surrounded by smoke and fire. Now, he can get himself up, but it isn't enough. We've already been taught waking from dreams isn't always enough, and he does end up passing. Now, the end of this scene is someone deleting the file of what happened in the virtual space and then destroying that file, like the hard drive that it's stored on, making it basically seem like he's never existed in that virtual space, and also causing, inevitably, massive issues for Shen. Now, she's moved away after this, seemingly to some sort of health facility, and she gets a visitor, and it's her co-worker that we've heard from a few times, and he tells her what we just learned, that the tape was intentionally destroyed, not burned up in the fire alongside the chief, as is the story being told to people. It's clear that it is not Shen who is at fault, but rather someone within the virtual reality who's running that is causing problems here. And we also learn that there are others who see what Shen saw when she was in the virtual space, and come to learn that it is a visual representation of people's subconscious, which obviously is why it's nightmares, because you're sort of uploading your brain, but it's talked about more like you're uploading your conscious, but it's everything. And here's the thing, it's sort of, it's difficult to explain, but basically it is made clear to her that if she is one of these people, then this could cause problems for her, because it could cause problems for these people running the virtual space. So she basically says, I didn't see anything, I don't know what you're talking about, I didn't see shit. And it very much seems like her co-worker is going, you didn't see anything, did you? And she's like, I didn't see anything. And despite everything, the story ends with that headless monster being with her once more. But it seems like it's slowly withering away now, and she can find comfort in getting sleep at this point. It is an incredible story that really messes with your head while doing a fantastic job of commentating on the way that work expectations can kill people. It's brilliant. Now, I'm not covering everything like I said, so we are going to skip a couple forward, and I'm going to talk about the Yin Yang Pot by Xueting. This is one of those horror stories where it's a case of, oh, a lot of you guys are dicks, and I think I'm rooting for some of you, but also no. Look, it's a great story, to be clear. It's a definite standout, but our lead is kind of a selfish arsehole who ends up getting someone killed. Well, sort of. The girl's body is still alive, I guess, but she's also not really. She's sort of buried in there, like her consciousness. She's not living, I'll say that much. So he messes with a life and death spiritual scenario and basically ends up using a girl who he knows is into him as a vessel for the spirit of his dead girlfriend. Now, that girl is still in there somewhere, but she just can't control anything. She doesn't have her faculties of anything. She's just sort of in there somewhere. And then the guy who did that ends up suffering the same fate at the end, becoming a vessel. And I don't think I felt bad for him. He was told very clearly what to do at the beginning to make this a seamless time. None of this, like, bullshit with spirit swapping would have happened if he'd have just listened. And also, he's, like, then playing games with life and death. He made his choices. I don't know that I feel sorry for him. This is, like, a campfire story or, like, an old folk tale. It's got that air of warning to it, and I really enjoy that. It's a definite standout from the collection. And speaking of standouts, next we have You Heard of Ancient Glory by Zhou Dedong. The twists and turns of this story are absolutely insane. It's going back and forth on what you believe as more and more information is handed to you, with a mix of dealing with, like, witness stories, which are always going to be a little bit unreliable, and just an unreliable narrator at some point. And, like, he's not supposed to be unreliable for the most part, but then one thing happens and it's like, oh, wait, how much can I fucking trust you then? Nothing can be trusted. In the first instance, we are led to believe that a man and his girlfriend move into the only apartment that they could afford to buy that was close to where they both worked. It is way too quiet in the area around them, though. I'm going to use the word, like, village or like town around the apartment block, because I couldn't figure out how to say the word that they used. It is like a specific word, but so yeah, like the surrounding area being the sort of town around them and the apartment block they're in, there's nothing. It's like, it's not just quiet, there is nobody outside ever, and it seems like there's nobody in the rest of the apartment block. There's this one line where it's basically talking about, like, it feels like maybe everybody's trying to listen into them because it's so quiet. They know there are other people that are meant to be in there. They've been told that other people have been buying them up, but he can't hear anything, neither can she. And then the girlfriend keeps having these nightmares about everybody in the rest of the flats lying there, each with a coin in their mouth. And kind of interesting to see that is like across different cultures, the coin in the mouth thing, because it is a thing of like, I mean, I know it is like it's the thing you use to pay the ferryman, and it seems like that's multicultural, which is very cool. After a few days away, because she's having the nightmare, she wants to spend some time with her mother before an upcoming festival, and they come back on the day of the Qingming festival, which is one honouring and commemorating deceased and loved ones. That's what that festival's for. But on that day, out of nowhere, the car park and surrounding area and the flats themselves are like chock full of people. Just suddenly. And in that moment, the couple understand the truth. The only flat with living beings inside is theirs. The rest are taken up with dead people as final resting places, because usual burial grounds are becoming too expensive, which, fucking hell, side tangent by the way, apparently this is not this story itself, but that concept is a thing that's happening in China. Jesus fucking Christ, like, burial grounds are becoming too expensive for people, so it's cheaper to buy a flat and just put your dead rellies in there. And that is just the opening chapter of the story. It only gets like weirder from here, I guess would be the right thing. So we're now following a journalist. He is our new narrator, and again, not the most reliable, but he gets an interview with the fella from the couple we've just read about, and to get more information after his initial chat, he talks to the person who runs the apartment complex. I'll use the word estate agent to describe him, but I don't know if that would be the right word. But this man says his girlfriend died, which was a great trauma to him. He bought a suite from our office, put his girlfriend's ashes in there, and keeps it company all the time. He thinks that she's still alive. And we learn about him, like, seemingly talking to this girlfriend that doesn't exist, and it seems, and it makes sense at this point. Like, it's a twist, it's a great one, but it does make sense. And in future interviews, like, this fella from the couple keeps saying that his girlfriend's gonna join them later, she'll join us later, and obviously never does. So the journo contacts the place of work that the girlfriend was at and confirms, with the name that the estate agent gave him, that's important, that yeah, she's passed away and did so in a car accident. So seemingly at this point, that fella from the start is, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs or whatever, but it definitely feels like there's a deeper dive to be done, because he seems so intent on the fact that, like, she's still with us. Like, they have another interview, and that fella then gets a call basically being like, it's my girlfriend, she's been in a car accident. It's like, yeah, that happened months if not years ago. So why is that call happening now? Is this fella just cracked? Like, is he just trying to get out of the interview or get out of bringing her in? is this like a Groundhog Day situation? That was one of the ideas that I had, of like he's reliving things either literally or figuratively in his head. So we go into more investigation, and then the next chapter is where we go, oh, okay, the journalist is not necessarily the most reliable narrator, because the end of this next chapter, seemingly from the start of the one after it, is him just like going, well, we can't definitely say that this is what's happened, but this is what I think. And it's like, huh? So, it's pure conjecture, honestly. So, the couple want to move out because of her nightmares and, you know, being the only living beings in the place. It's too much. So, they're basically given a day to get out. And they do so. But in the night, he has to go back to, I think, like, collect some final things. But because the journalist is a fucking pain, he ends up turning it into this ghost story. Like, he walks in, and there's an urn in there. And at first you're thinking, oh, that's the girlfriend's urn, like, it's confirmed. Like, this is where he's sort of realised that he's actually cracked. Except it's some old woman's urn. And then he sees the ghost of this old woman. So there's truth within this. Like, I think the first part of that is true, like them moving out, and then like everything up to him getting to the flat is true. Then there's the ghost stuff, and then he ends up going off his balcony in some way. We don't know how, but he ends up off his balcony and he lands on his car, killing him. It is unclear whether he did this of his own volition, but if somebody did push him, it's probably not the ghost. And, like, I want to be clear, that's a really good scene. And, like, that beginning of it, the next one, where it's like, yeah, I can't be sure. Like, let me find it, sorry. He's like, oh, I've been drinking and dancing and basically just thinking about what I could do with her. So, you know, I don't really know what happened in that apartment. And it's like, excuse you? You're our source here. What do you mean you don't know? Then don't fucking put it in. I like the way this all fits together, and I like that this character is just like, huh? So, after the man's death, the journo gets, I think, a text or a message from the man's number. I'll say it's a text. I think it's a message, but he gets a text from the number asking to meet up. He knows it can't be him, but he's curious about what this means. It's the girlfriend, you know, the one that's meant to be fucking dead. And she is very much alive. You know the name that the estate agent gave? It's a colleague of hers. Yes, she did die in a car accident, but they're two different women. And I assume that, like, I can't remember if it actually says, I assume she did get into an accident, like, during that interview, and I'm assuming there is good reason that she wasn't meeting up with them. I assume it probably was the accident, honestly. She's convinced, and frankly so am I, that the estate agent, or like the company, is somebody from that company is the one that killed her boyfriend in some way, either literally or did or said something to make him end it. The police are still gathering evidence and it's all up in the air, but I believe that, because why would he give that different name and know that information, trying to make it sound like he's crazy? Because if he's crazy, yeah, of course he'd throw himself off, and it's deeply traumatic for him. This is a story full of twists and turns. It did have me hooked at every moment. It's one of my favourites, definitely in the top 3. Might be my favourite because I love the way everything like started clicking together. I'm like, brilliant. So, the next story in the book is one of the longest, if not the longest. So I'm not going to go over it all because, look, I know I love a long video, but I'm being good this time and I'm aiming for, like, at best 90 minutes. I'm hoping for closer to 60, and I think I should be able to get that. I don't want to be like rambling for too long, especially given that how much more detail I went into Waking Dream and this one, to be honest. And I could go into so much more detail with more stories, but I want to be able to like I said, I don't want to have you here all day. So the next story is Records of Shang-Chi by Nanpai Sanshu. And I loved this story. Firstly, because it did keep reminding me of the film Dog Soldiers. It's got a great amount of well-placed humour that really rings of the stuff you do hear from like military type guys. And yes, there is one moment where I wish that humour were left out. It felt like the wrong moment for it, but that didn't detract from how much I enjoyed it overall and how much I loved the way that humour played into everything. And the horror in this one is palpable. It's one of two where I really physically felt it. This one and the last one, which I will talk about. Like, it sat in my bones as I went through. I was scared for certain characters, and it slowly builds. Like, the early going of this is very... It reads like a journal, a literary journal, not like a diary journal. It does take a while to get into the real horror of it, but once it starts, it doesn't stop, and it's so good. There's this moment where we've seen the corpse of one creature, and that creature was already scary, but then as they go through, they realise there is a second corpse, which is much larger. There's a horrible moment of realisation. This thing is very malignant, eats people's brains, and lives underground. The corpse we came upon before was probably its prey, but how come... Ironmouth Key was puzzled. How come it's dead too? Absolutely horrifying question. There's always a bigger fish type deal. Horrifying, thank you. Because when you see the corpse of the second one, it's like that thing is what killed the last one. It's like, oh, that's really scary. And it's just like not thinking about, like, oh, I don't know how to explain it. It's just like, I didn't think about, like, wait. And that line made it go, it clicked. And it's just, oh, yeah. And this story brings together so many of the aspects of horror that make it such a fantastic genre. It's well worth the runtime given to it. It had me physically gagging so many times. The milk. Read it and find out. From gagging to being left gagged, let's talk Forbidden Rooms by Joe Harway. While I could go into a huge amount of detail on this one, again, this is one of my favourites in the collection. I think I actually want you to... No. I need you to go out and find this story. If you get this book, get it for Ancient Glory and this in particular. There are, like I said, I love Waking Dream, but out of the two stories where I'm like, these are the ones you need to read it for, it is Ancient Glory and it is this one. But with Ancient Glory, I love rambling about it, talking about it like that, because it can feel like I just feel like this one is better if I just let you immerse yourself in it. This one had me in a vice grip. It's in a grey area between thriller and horror. So, do you know, like, some stories where it's like, yeah, I feel like technically it could happen, but it's unlikely. Does that make sense? Like, you know those films, like, oh, what's it called? Robin Lord Taylor's in it, but I can't remember what it... Would You Rather? I knew it was like a game name. It's like that sort of thing, is this one. Not in that, like, rich person makes poor people do things, but more in a kind of... That isn't something that's happening, but it has a level of, like, but it could, and this has that to it as well. And the characters really make this one. The guy in it feels so unreasonable the whole time. Actually, even when things get revealed, I don't know that it makes him any more reasonable to me. He is at fault, partly, and you can't change my mind on that. Meanwhile, throughout the story, I do have so much sympathy for the female lead, and yet the closer we get to the end, the harder it is to continue that feeling. But also, she's the most understandable one out of the two of them. Like, I understand the way she behaves. And it did bring out, like, the kind of detective in me, the way that crime thrillers often do. And yeah, as always, I was, like, often following the trail, but just not quite following it properly. Like, I was picking up on the trail, but not quite following it properly. Especially putting something together at the last moment. There is a certain, oh, that's what that meant. Because of course. Like, this sits in a very different area of the genre to the rest of the book, but it absolutely earns its place in the collection. It is a wonderful story. And we are getting towards the end of the collection now, and it only continues to bring us fantastic pieces with Tinang by Su Min. And as a lover of gothic fiction, I love doppelganger stories. And while this is not necessarily a gothic story, that is just a common feature of that genre. But I love doppelganger stories because of my love of the gothic. And this story uses that subject so damn well. We have a girl who's been away from her family in a tiny little southern village for nearly 10 years. And she's met a guy. He's a journalist and he wants to get married. So he convinces her that she should take him to meet her parents. And oh my god, looking back at the beginning of this now, knowing that he was the one that's like, I want to meet your parents, I want to meet your parents, I want to meet your parents. Fuck you. Fuck you. Oh, horrible little git. Now, the whole village does not like outsiders. It is said throughout that they're very xenophobic. And that's not just to people, like, outside of the country. That is, like, outside the village, they're disgusted. And I think, at least in part, that is because of their use of Tinangs. And also, probably because of the Civil War. The way that's spoken about a lot within this. The fiancé, when he at least says that he's like, oh, are there lots of twins around here? But I don't think that was just a ploy. That was just a ploy, you little shit. Oh, sorry. I'm spoiling the end of this one, so you'll find out why I'm getting frustrated later. But these people that he's like, oh, there are lots of twins, are man-made creations that used to be used as spies during the Civil War, like this type of creation, but now are effectively used as dogs' bodies. Though, like I said, when they were first created, it was spy work. They used to only be able to be used from the deceased, but they figured ways to make them from living beings as well. Now, our lead, she is convinced that her mother was replaced with one of these Tinangs years ago. So, our protagonist had an accident many years ago, when she was 10. And when she recovered, her mother was noticeably different, unaware of many of her daughter's tastes, a lot of the habits that she used to have, all those sorts of things. Things were off. Now, the issue that I spotted straight away with that is that we'd already learned that Tinangs don't age, and we were told that her mother has. And I knew, learning those two things, they were separately learned of. We learn when she's showing her fiancé some of the history of the town, and that's where we learn that they don't age. And it's when we meet the mother that it's like, oh, she's got really old. So I was like, these two things are going to be linked. When she then says, I think my mother's been replaced by Tinang. And she eventually confronts her father about her thoughts, and he says the same thing that I was thinking. He's a lot more rude about it than I am, but I was glad to have my thoughts cemented in that moment. But then our lead gets the idea that she's still right, but he has continually replaced the model as she should have been getting older. Like, he basically gets an older looking model to keep up the illusion. Now, he works at the workshop where they make them, And the thing he does is detailing work, so it is very possible. So she and her fiance set out to go to the workshop after hours to find where they keep the disused or non-functional T9s. And it is very haunting to consider, because rather than, like, I don't know if this would be the right word, but like put them down, they just sort of get used for spare parts. Now, they're not wandering about or anything. It seems like they are sort of presented more like corpses, like, or maybe turned off, but they're not robots. Like, it's never fully explained, and there is a lot left unsaid about the T9s, but that is for the better, I think. You have to do a lot of coming to your own conclusions, and there's no way to not have that be deeply unpleasant. But as they're looking around the workshop, trying to get to that disuse area sort of thing, the fiancé is taking a bunch of pictures. This will come back up in a minute. So when they get to the room she's looking for, she does not find the old models of her mother. Instead, she finds old models of her young self. She didn't make it when she had the accident, and her father made ever-aging T9s as he was unable to live with the grief. And her mother is the way she is because she physically gave her over 10 years of her memory so that our lead could exist as a normal girl, which is an incredible sacrifice. It is one of those things where it's like, that is a mother's love right there. She gave up so much of her, physically, of herself, so that her daughter could continue existing. And the fiancé, he actually had zero intentions of marriage. That bastard just wanted an article on the town and the T9s, and finding out that his fiancé is one was just like, for him it was like, I've hit the jackpot. That's why it was all that stuff earlier where I'm like, wait, hang on, the way he uses her is foul. But he does get what's coming to him. He basically loses his job, and he has no evidence, one, because he gets bonked over the head by her dad, and then like he's like basically bragging, and then her dad comes in, bonks him with a stick, and destroys all of the evidence he's had. He destroys his camera, he destroys his phone. It's great, it's very cathartic. But the ending of this story is devastating. When you can put all those pieces together, you know, you make sense of her mother's change, where it's like, earlier she's talking about, I think she's a T9 because she doesn't remember that I like her putting bows in my hair. She doesn't remember what laundry detergent she uses. She doesn't remember that I don't like tomatoes. And I have all of these memories of running through the streets, and I can hear my mother's voice calling my name in the dream. Like, the story opens with her wading through the streets, running through the streets, and she can hear her mother calling her name. She has this in the back of her head, and it turns out she has all this because it is her mother's memories. And we also learned that it wasn't long after all of that that her dad, he does become awful. Like, if we're honest, he becomes aggressive. I don't know if abusive is the right word, but I think it is. But aggressive, at the very least. He becomes a drunk. He stops going to work. He sends his T9 instead. And it is rough. Like, none of his actions become forgivable, but he does become much more understandable. It is a very tough but absolutely phenomenal story, and again, the open-ended nature of what's really going with the T9s is just really interesting. Like, it's never answered just how sentient they are, because we know that our protagonist is sentient, but she was given those memories. But the others are given certain levels of sentience, it seems. And they're just being used as dogs' bodies, and they're just items, except they're probably people with feelings. Like, they bleed. She gets cut at one point, and she bleeds. Like a real person does. Meaning she feels pain. Like a real person does. And these things are just getting discarded. It's grim. It's really grim. But we did start at the start, so let's end with the end, with the death of Nala by Xueting. If there is one thing in horror near guaranteed to make me go, fuck that, in the way you're supposed to with the genre, it's creepy ass kids. And the little fucker in this story can fuck right off. Jesus Christ, he is a ranted, creepy little bastard, only made worse by the revelation of what's really going on at the end. This is another one I won't spoil because it's right at the end of the book, you know, and it is pretty well served by me just letting you read it. Have the horrific realizations that I did. He is a awful little shit. You know what? I'll say this. One of my notes is simply, oh, fuck off, you little freak. Go away. Which I think is the only right way to talk about that horrible little bastard. Fantastic story, though. It did exactly what it's supposed to do. I bloody hate creepy kids. And I think, like, I will make the joke, like, these hands are rated E for everyone. But I think creepy kids are so much scarier than creepy adults. Because, like, if an adult is being weird, you can do and say things that you can't to a child. Like, if I am in fear of an adult, I can theoretically fight my way out of that situation. It's mentally easier for me to imagine decking an adult than it is like a 5-year-old, and that's how old this creepy little shit is. He's 5 years old. That is mentally more taxing, even if he is a horrible little freak. Do you know what I mean? Like, you're just not supposed to do that to a kid. But it is a fantastic way to round out the collection, and this whole book is chock full of horror goodness. Like, what a great way to start out 2025 with my reading. Even though I know a couple of the books I have in my upcoming reading list, like, I know what they are. I am hoping that on the whole we're starting as we mean to continue. And look, if you are seeking to broaden your horror horizons, you definitely need to get this read. And honestly, if you're looking for a good intro to horror, I think this is a great shout, because there's such a range of types of stories being told in here. There is something for everyone, I think. But let me know if you have any plans or reading goals for 2025, and tell me some cool and unusual horror you've read lately. Tell me some, like, you know, stuff that's maybe not so mainstream. Not any of that weird extreme shit. Like, what's that one called? Like, Playground or whatever. I'm not into all of that. But if you've got any, like, weird stuff, or stuff like this, where, like, I may not have heard about this, like, I only saw this at the library, that's why I've heard about it, like, do let me know, because I am getting more into the genre, like, books, not films, on the whole, because a book is easier to put down, and especially short form collections like this, I do love that. But yeah, let me know, and you can feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and feel free to put your notifications on and all that other cringe shit I'm supposed to ask you to do. But most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you are watching this. Take good care of yourself. Right.